When we think about measuring speed as part of our daily lives, we tend to be dealing with one of two different units. We tend to either think of speed being measured in miles per hour, or mph, or we think of speed being measured in kilometers per hour, or km/h. Now there's something that connects these two units, and that's what they are made up of. If we look very closely, we should see that both of these units of speed are made up of a distance unit, miles in the first case, kilometers in the second, and they are both made up of a time unit, hours in each. And in fact, more than that, we've got per hour, miles per hour and kilometers per hour. In fact, this is true of any unit of speed. Any unit of speed will be a combination of a distance unit and a time unit in exactly this way. Because of this, speed is what is known as a compound measure. Compound as in joining together, and we literally join together a distance unit and a time unit to make a unit of speed. Any unit of speed will be made up of a distance per a unit of time. Miles per hour, kilometers per hour. Other examples that we could have include this one, meters per second, m/s, which is also seen on the exam. In terms of exam questions, speed will generally either be working in miles per hour, kilometers per hour, or meters per second. But we could actually build any speed unit that we wanted by taking a distance unit, any will do, per a time unit. For example, inches per minute would be a perfectly reasonable measure of speed. But the three we tend to come across on the exam, miles per hour, kilometers per hour, meters per second. So then the question is, why are all speed units a distance unit per a time unit? Think about this word per in the middle. And one of the things that this word per can mean is for every. So what a speed unit is it is a measure of distance for every unit of time that you are looking at. So miles per hour is the number of miles for every 1 hour that you go. Kilometers per hour, the number of kilometers for every 1 hour of time that passes. Meters per second, the number of meters travelled for every second that passes. And why does that make sense? Well, surely, if we just think about what speed is, surely speed is just a measure of how far you go in a given amount of time. The slower your speed, the less distance you travel in a given amount of time. The faster your speed, the more distance you cover in the same amount of time. So we can narrow all of that down to say that a decent definition of speed would be that speed is the number of a particular distance unit you travel in 1 unit of time. For example, 19 miles per hour means that you travel 19 miles in 1 hour. 8 meters per second means that you travel 8 meters in 1 second. In each case, the speed is the measure of how many of those distance units you go, 19 miles in the first example, 8 meters in the second example, in 1 unit of time. 1 hour in the first case, 1 second in the second example. So there is clearly a connection between those 3 units, speed, distance and time. And exam questions about speed tend to be that you are given 2 of those units, speed, distance or time, and asked to find the third one. And we're going to do all types of these questions in the same way. Let's have a look at an example and we'll walk this through. A car travels at 70 kilometers per hour for 3 hours. What distance does the car travel in this time? So if we look carefully at that question, we are given a speed, 70 kilometers per hour, we are given a time, 3 hours, and we are asked to find the distance. So we're given 2 of the 3 units and asked to find the third one. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw a table, and the table is always going to look the same. So we're going to draw ourselves a nice grid. Here, we're going to have a row for speed, and here we're going to have a row that I'm going to call journey. This row here is going to contain information about the speed that's given to us in the question. This row here is going to contain information given to us about the particular journey being made, i.e. the car, and what the car is doing. We could call this whatever we want. We could call it car if we like. I'm going to call it journey because this will work for any table. It's generic enough. I'm then going to have a column here for distance, and I'm going to have a column here for time. The idea being that this box here is going to contain the distance information about the speed, the box here is going to contain the time information about the speed, this box here will be the distance information about the journey, the car, and this box here will be the time information about the journey, so how much time the journey took. And I'm eventually going to transfer the information out of the question into the correct boxes in this table to help me work out the one that I'm missing. Once we've drawn our table, we're going to make a note of the units being used as well. What units are we using for time? Well, we must be talking about hours because there is a mention in the question of hours. And what units are we talking about for distance? We're going to have to unpick that a little bit, but look at the speed. It's 70 kilometers per hour. We must be talking about kilometers as the distance unit. We are now going to start transferring information from the question into the correct box in the table, except that there is one more thing we can do in these questions before we do that. One more number that we can put in every single time. Think about what speed is. Speed is the number of distance units that you travel in 1 unit of time. In this case, 1 hour. That speed, 70 kilometers per hour, means you go 70 kilometers in 1 hour. Whenever we are looking at a speed, we are always going to be working with 1 unit of time. 1 hour, 1 second, 1 whatever we happen to be looking at. So that means that this box here, the time information for the speed, because speed is the distance that you go in 1 unit of time, this box here can always contain a number 1. It will always contain a number 1 because of the definition of what speed is. That speed is the distance travelled in 1 unit of time, 1 hour, 1 second, whatever we happen to be looking at. So this is our basic table. Speed, journey, distance, time with the units on there. The units might change and this will always be a 1. Now we look at the question and we work out what we can pick out of the question. A car travels at 70 kilometers per hour. That's 70 kilometers in 1 hour. We've already got the 1 hour in there because that's always going to go in for these questions. The distance part of the speed for the 70 kilometers per hour is a speed. The distance part of the speed will go in this box here because this is the distance information for the speed. So we put that in. So that's 70 kilometers. The speed is 70 kilometers in 1 hour. A car travels at 70 kilometers per hour for 3 hours. Now, the 3 hours is the journey. So the journey time is given to us. It's 3 hours. So we can put a 3 in there. What distance does the car travel in this time? All the numbers have been picked out of the question. We're missing information in one of those boxes. We've got nothing in that box, but that's okay. Because what distance does the car travel in this time? What distance does the car travel? That's the box we're missing. Okay, next step. We turn the first row into a ratio. We turn the second row into a ratio. And we notice we've got something missing. We then look at the complete ratio, which in this case happens to be the top row. And we ask ourselves, how have we got from the top row to the second row? To get from 1 to 3, we have to have times by 3. These are two ratios, so if we have times by 3 on the right-hand side of the ratios, then we also have to times by 3 on the left-hand side of the ratios. 70 times by 3 gives us 210, and we pull that information out of the question, which means the distance that the car travelled must have been 210 kilometres. With any of these questions, the hardest thing about them is getting all the numbers in the right place. Once you've got the table right, and the table works every time, the two rows, speed on the top row, journey on the bottom row, two columns, distance and time, and a 1 in that top right-hand box, because the time part of the speed is always going to be 1. Once you've got that table right, and then filled in the information in the correct place, the rest of the question is just a scaling up or down ratios. But the hardest part of the question is going to be filling in that table. But again, it's always the same table. If we read the question carefully, we can work out what needs to go where. Let's have a look at another one. A car travels 100 kilometres in 2 hours. Calculate the speed the car was travelling at. So we know it's a speed question, it directly mentions the word speed, which means we draw a table. So we draw ourselves the table first of all. Same table as always. So we have our two rows. We have our row for speed and we have our row for journey. We have our column for distance and we have our column for time. We know that the time unit is always going to be 1, whatever unit we are working in. That top box is always going to be 1 because the speed is defined as the distance you go when the time is 1, whatever it is we're looking at. Picking the units out of the question, 100 kilometres, so our distance is in kilometres. And there's a mention of 2 hours, so the time must be in hours. It doesn't change the question in any way if we don't put the units on, but it is worth putting the units on just so that we are always working in the correct units, just in case we do have to switch any around at any point, and so that we can get the right units out at the end. We now need to fill in the information from the question. A car travels 100 kilometres. The car is doing the travelling, so that must be the distance part of the journey in 2 hours. Well, that must be the time part of the journey. So there's our 2. We are missing the distance part of the speed, but that makes sense because the question asks us to work out the speed. So we're going to need to work out how many distance units it goes in the 1 hour. We turn this into a ratio then. So we have a ratio on the top row, something to 1. And we have a ratio on the bottom row, 100 to 2. We then start from the complete ratio, that's the one on the bottom line this time, and we ask how we get from that complete one to the incomplete one. So how have we got from 2 down to 1? We have simply divided by 2. If we've divided by 2 on the right-hand side of the ratio, then we have to also do the same on the left-hand side, which means we're going to do 100. We're going to divide it by 2. 100 divided by 2 is 50. We then simply need to pull the information out of the table. The speed is going to be 50. 50 what though? We need to give it some units. Well, the speed unit is going to be a combination of the distance unit and the time unit. It goes 50 kilometres in 1 hour. So our unit is going to be 50 kilometres per hour, 50 km/h. A man drives 60 miles at a constant speed in 90 minutes. What is his speed in miles per hour? It's a speed question again, so we draw another table first of all. We have got speed as a row, journey as a row, distance as a column, and time as a column, and the time unit is always going to be 1. Because speed is defined as the amount of distance that you cover in 1 unit of time. Distance unit we're working with, 60 miles is mentioned, so the distance unit this time is miles. And the time unit that's mentioned, well, depends which bit of the question we read. There is a mention of 90 minutes, but we are asked to give the speed in miles per hour. So really we need the speed to be given in hours. We need to be thinking about 1 hour here. So we're going to call the time unit hours. We need to fill in the information from the question. Well, the man drives 60 miles at a constant speed. So the journey, the distance part of that will have to be 60. And the time part of that, well, it mentions 90 minutes. Problem is, because of what we want the speed to be, we've just said the time unit really needs to be hours, so we can be looking at 1 hour here. This is not in hours, this is in minutes. But maybe we could just convert that 90 minutes into hours. 60 minutes in an hour, remember? So 90 minutes must be a 60 minutes plus an extra 30 minutes, and 30 minutes is half an hour. So 90 minutes, instead of putting 90 minutes, we could instead say 1.5 hours or 1.5 hours. Keep everything in the same units. We can then set up our two ratios. So on the bottom, we've got a complete ratio of 60 to 1.5. On the top, we've got an incomplete ratio of something to 1. We start from the complete one. How do we get from 1.5 down to 1? Well, we're going to have to divide by 1.5. Anything divided by itself will get you down to 1. If we've divided by 1.5 on the right, we have to also divide by 1.5 on the left. So we do 60 divided by 1.5. Possibly we grab our calculators if we need to. But we do 60, we divide it by 1.5, and we get 40. So we pull that out of the question at the end. The question says, what is his speed in miles per hour? The speed, 40 miles in 1 hour, so the speed must be 40 mph, 40 miles per hour.